Humans have a habit of falling for things that look flashy and expensive. It's probably hardwired into, who doesn't like owning something that looks impressive and costs a premium? But appearances and price tags can be misleading, and making decisions based on them alone can easily backfire. Bourbon is no different. A fancy bottle and a high price don't automatically mean great whiskey, and a cheaper or plain-looking bottle doesn't mean it's going to taste like nail polish remover either. Ask any bourbon fan and they'll tell you not to judge a whiskey by its bottle and to always do your homework. Sounds like common sense. That said, they'll also admit, sometimes painfully, that a lot of lessons are learned the hard way. That's exactly why we're breaking down a few bourbons you might regret buying, so you don't fall for the shiny bottle trap, but also stick around till the end, as we will be telling you the only two that are actually worth it along with a bonus one. 7. Jefferson's Ocean Aged at Sea. Back in 2012, Jefferson's Bourbon teamed up with OCARC, a well-known nonprofit that tracks and studies marine life, to try out a pretty wild idea. The thinking was simple. If bourbon is constantly moving around inside wooden barrels on a ship, maybe it'll age faster. And honestly, if you've got bourbon in a research vessel, why not give it a shot? That experiment became Jefferson's Ocean Aged at Sea. The barrels stayed on OCARC's ship for 3 years, even traveling through the Panama Canal multiple times. When Jefferson's master blender finally cracked them open, the bourbon had developed deeply caramelized sugars and turned into a thick, dark liquid, which in this case is a very good thing. This bourbon delivers an interesting experience that starts stronger than it finishes. On the nose, there isn't much intensity, with only faint notes of honey, citrus, and a mild, musty, grassy character coming through. The palate opens on a surprisingly sweet note, offering flavors of brown sugar, orange marmalade, caramel, and vanilla, but that initial sweetness fades quickly. As the tasting goes on, oak and earthy mustiness begin to dominate, overpowering the earlier balance. The finish leans heavily into walnut, vanilla, dense oak, and cigar smoke, with drying tannins that linger and leave the tongue feeling parched. While the concept behind this bourbon is undeniably creative, the execution falls short, resulting in a bottle that feels more intriguing in theory than in the glass. Overall, it lands as a subpar pour. One well-known reviewer, SLB Basement Bourbon Bar, wasn't impressed at all, saying they regretted dropping $80 on a bottle that was basically all story and no payoff. According to them, everything else, the nose, palate, and finish, was rough with an overwhelming leather and tobacco flavor and a lot of bitterness. On top of that, 31 Whiskey points out that Jefferson's doesn't actually distill its own bourbon. It sources whiskey from elsewhere and sells it under its label. So it kind of feels like most of the money went into marketing and branding rather than what's in the bottle. This might be one worth throwing back overboard. 6. Garrison Brothers Texas Straight Small Batch Bourbon Whiskey. Garrison Brothers holds the title of being the first legal whiskey distillery outside of Kentucky, meaning they've got all the proper approvals from the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission to officially make and sell their spirits. That's a cool milestone, but as the saying goes, being first doesn't always mean being best. A lot of bourbon fans online, especially on Reddit, aren't exactly kind when it comes to Garrison Brothers. Many say the bottles are way overpriced for what you get, arguing the bourbon just doesn't stack up against cheaper options. Some of the criticism might come down to high expectations, though. Pace Magazine points out that people complaining about bourbon prices is pretty much universal. Flavor-wise, the feedback isn't much nicer. Reviewers often describe the whiskey as tasting very young, overly woody, or just plain funky, with some comparing it to chewing on a tree branch. Prices usually start around $40 to $50, so it's not outrageously expensive, but that heavy, off-putting woodiness seems to be a common theme across their lineup. And when comments like rotting peanuts and cardboard get thrown around, it's enough to make most people think twice before picking up a bottle. 5. Angel's Envy Kentucky Straight Bourbon. Angel's Envy is based in Louisville, Kentucky, and is known for its small batch bourbons finished in a variety of casks, including port, rum, sherry, and tawny. Bottles can range from a fairly accessible $40 all the way into the thousands. And with roots going back about 200 years, the brand has built a strong reputation, especially after its cast-strength release was named Best Spirit in the World in 2013. That said, reactions to Angel's Envy Kentucky Straight Bourbon are pretty mixed. Reviews across the internet tend to agree that the port barrel finishing makes it extremely sweet, sometimes to a fault. Official tasting notes highlight vanilla, raisins, maple syrup, and toasted nuts, which some drinkers find pleasant, while others think it borders on dessert-like. Critics have described the flavor as tasting like bourbon mixed with maple syrup and artificial sweetener, and Reddit users often complain that it comes off as overly sweet, slightly bitter, and closer to watered-down bourbon blended with wine. If you're into port wine flavors and don't mind a sweeter profile, spending $40 to $50 on a bottle might make sense. But for traditional bourbon fans, it could be a bit much. 4. Kentucky Gentleman. Kentucky Gentleman comes from the Sazerac Company, the same folks behind brands like Fireball, Myers' Rum, and Southern Comfort, and is distilled at the massive Barton/1792 distillery, one of the largest in the world. Despite those credentials, it's often mentioned right away whenever people talk about bourbons they regret buying. Reviews aren't kind. Tasters on Distiller describe it as bland, rough, and tough to drink, with very little flavor to speak of. At around $10 for a 750 milliliter bottle, most agree it tastes cheap for a reason. The general consensus is that if you do pick it up, it's best used as a mixer rather than something you'd sip neat. And you might want a solid, greasy breakfast the next day. Composed of just 51% straight whiskey aged a minimum of 36 months and 49% grain-neutral spirits, it doesn't qualify as straight bourbon, or even bourbon at all. On the nose, it's extremely faint, offering only weak hints of corn, leather, and oak, even after resting. The palate is similarly muted, with mild, honey-like sweetness, powdered sugar, and traces of corn and leather, but nothing complex or engaging. The finish is short and unimpressive, leaving behind an oddly artificial, chemical sweetness that lingers longer than it should. Overall, it's inoffensive but uninspiring, with little reason to sip it neat. While it technically serves a purpose as cheap alcohol or possibly a mixer, it delivers no real enjoyment and risks a rough hangover if consumed in quantity. With far better bonded bourbons available for only a few dollars more, this one is hard to justify and earns a solid 2 out of 10. Bad, but not the absolute worst. Review from Whiskey Warehouse echoed those thoughts, calling it thin and basically watered-down bourbon with nothing memorable going on. Reddit users were even more blunt, with one joking that there's nothing gentlemanly about it at all. On the bright side, the low price makes it decent for blind tastings or as a joke gift. Just don't expect much beyond that. 3. Willett Pot Still Reserve. What tastes like creamed corn mixed with burnt plastic but comes in a super flashy genie-style bottle? According to at least one Redditor, that would be Willett Pot Still. The Willett family has been around whiskey making for centuries, though the Willett distillery itself was officially founded in 1936, shortly after Prohibition ended. Willett Pot Still is labeled as a Kentucky straight bourbon, meaning it's aged for at least 2 years in new charred oak barrels, though this one reportedly spends around 8 to 10 years aging. Ironically, it's even won a double gold medal, but that award was for the bottle design, not the liquid inside. The bottle is meant to resemble the old-school pot stills the distillery once used, and it definitely stands out on a shelf. Official tasting notes paint a very pleasant picture, with aromas like vanilla lemon cake and flavors of caramel, vanilla, citrus, and spice. Other descriptions mention butterscotch, molasses, brown sugar, and coffee. But real-world drinkers haven't been nearly as kind. Reddit reviews compare the taste to bitter rubber, while one distiller user memorably described it as chewing tobacco spit mixed with unsweetened tea left to ferment in a styrofoam cup during peak summer heat. At around $50 a bottle, the cool packaging can't quite save what many feel is a disappointing pour. Sadly, this is one genie bottle that won't grant you a refund or a good drinking experience. Plenty of people love the decanter-style design, though it's kind of wide and awkwardly tall, making it a pain to slot neatly onto a crowded whiskey shelf. Still, the real question here isn't how it looks. It's whether what's inside lives up to the presentation. Willett Pot Still Reserve is now said to be distilled in-house, though for years it was widely believed to be sourced whiskey. It also used to be a single-barrel release before shifting to a batched format, bottled at a respectable 47% ABV. That's not cask strength, but it's at least a solid, no-nonsense proof. Beyond that, though, details are pretty scarce. No age statement, no barrel specifics, and not much information beyond some shiny gold marketing text on the bottle. On the nose, it starts off sweet and fairly subtle, with sappy oak and dry vanilla leading the way. There's caramel, molasses, and baking spices like clove and nutmeg, but those nicer notes clash with a creeping acetone or nail polish edge. It can come off grainy and a bit earthy, though hints of cherry help balance things out. With more time in the glass, the oak turns more bitter and slightly sour. The palate is warming despite a thinner mouthfeel, and it quickly becomes oak-forward, mixing sweetness with spice. Vanilla, black pepper, brown sugar, licorice, spearmint, and even a cough syrup note show up, along with caramel and anise. Fruit takes a back seat here as oak and spice dominate, eventually pushing the whiskey toward a dry, tannic, almost over-oaked profile. The finish is medium in length, packed with pepper, nutmeg, clove, and other baking spices. There's a brief flash of sweetness with grape and caramel notes, but it doesn't last long before snapping back to dry, tannic oak. Overall, it's straightforward, spice-heavy, and a bit one-note, nice looking on the shelf, but not quite as impressive in the glass. 2. Wild Turkey 101 Bourbon. Wild Turkey 101 Bourbon is one of those bottles that works just as well on its own as it does in a classic old-fashioned, depending on how it's poured. It's been around for decades and hasn't strayed from its original approach, sticking to the same methods that helped build its reputation in the first place. Aged between 6 and 8 years, it delivers a flavor profile that hits all the expected bourbon notes. Light sweetness up front with vanilla and caramel, followed by oak and baking spices through the middle. The aroma mirrors that balance, leaning into barrel-driven oak, while the finish brings a bold burst of Wild Turkey's signature spice with a hint of orange peel. Reliable, flavorful, and versatile, it's an easy choice for cocktails without losing its character. 1. Old Forester 100. Old Forester 100 may not carry a flashy, top-shelf price tag, but it more than earns its place as a go-to bourbon for an old-fashioned. Bottled at 100 proof, it's a longtime bartender favorite that nods to the legacy of founder George Garvin Brown, whose name still proudly sits on every bottle. Made from hand-picked barrels, this bourbon leans rich and robust, with a profile that stands up beautifully in cocktails. On the nose, it brings strong coffee sweetness, chocolate, butterscotch, and a touch of licorice, while the palate adds layers of apple and other sweet fruits, warm spices like clove and nutmeg, and toasted oak. The finish is smooth, sweet, and light, making it a reliable, no-nonsense choice that shines without trying too hard. Bonus: Larceny Small Batch. Larceny Small Batch stands out thanks to its use of wheat instead of rye as the secondary grain, giving it a smoother and slightly sweeter profile than many other bourbons. Visually, it pours a bright copper color, while the aroma brings hints of fresh bread, toffee, and a touch of butterscotch. On the palate, expect buttery caramel and honeyed notes with a rich, full mouthfeel, finishing long, gently sweet and savory. With its approachable yet flavorful profile, Larceny Small Batch makes a solid choice for sipping neat or crafting a classic old-fashioned. Well, that's it for today. That's a wrap on our roundup of bourbons you might regret buying, though thankfully a couple of solid choices make the list worth your while. The takeaway? Don't get swayed by flashy bottles or steep price tags. Sometimes the best pours are the ones that fly under the radar. Wild Turkey 101, Old Forester 100, and Larceny Small Batch prove that you can find great bourbon without falling for marketing hype. If you've tried any of these yourself or have your own regret bottles to share, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And stick around because we'll be bringing more bourbon insights and reviews your way soon. Cheers and drink wisely.